They say a wedding is the holiest moment between two people, where love meets eternity in front of God and witnesses. But on one Sunday morning in Atlanta, Georgia, eternity hesitated. Pastor Elijah stood at the altar, his hand raised not in blessing, but in warning, and spoke words that would shatter the silence of that sunlit church. Stop. This wedding cannot continue. In that single breath, 200 guests gasped. A rose fell from the bride's trembling hand, and somewhere in the back pew, a child began to cry. The organ music died mid-note. Whispers erupted like wildfire through rows of elegant hats and pressed suits. The groom turned pale, his eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. The bride, dressed in white lace that had taken months to choose, stood frozen as if her feet had been nailed to the floor. No one moved, no one breathed, because when a man of God stops a sacred ceremony, it's not a mistake, it's a message. And Pastor Elijah had seen something no one else in that room could see, something hidden beneath the surface of what looked like perfect love. What was it? What truth was buried so deep that it took a spiritual shepherd to uncover it? And more importantly, was he about to save 2 lives or destroy 2 hearts? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rewind 12 months. Michael Carter was 28 years old, a software engineer with a quiet confidence and a faith that ran deeper than his words. He wasn't flashy, he didn't chase attention. But when he walked into that community outreach event hosted by Mercy Hill Church, he carried the kind of presence that made people feel safe. That's where he met her. Amara, 26, a pediatric nurse with a smile that could disarm anyone, and a heart that seemed too generous for this world. She was volunteering at the health tent, checking blood pressures and handing out free vitamins to kids who couldn't afford a doctor's visit. Michael was teaching coding to teenage boys in the next tent over. Their eyes met across the courtyard during a water break, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't lust, it wasn't infatuation, it was recognition, like 2 souls who had been searching and finally found the map. Within weeks, they were inseparable. He loved the way she prayed before every meal, even in public. She loved the way he listened, really listened, like her words mattered more than his own thoughts. They were the kind of couple that made other people believe in love again. But beneath Amara's bright smile was a shadow she had never fully escaped. 2 years before she met Michael, Amara had been in a relationship that nearly destroyed her. His name was Damon, and he was everything Michael wasn't. Charismatic, controlling, possessive. He claimed to be a man of God, a self-proclaimed prophet, who led a small group that met in basements and abandoned warehouses. At first, Amara thought she had found a community of believers, but slowly the teachings twisted. Damon began to preach about spiritual marriages, soul ties, and covenants that transcended the physical world. He told Amara that God had revealed to him that she was his, bound to him for eternity, and to prove it, he performed a ritual. In a dimly lit room with candles and incense, he took her wrist and marked it with ink mixed with oil, a symbol he said was blessed by angels, 3 dots inside a loop. He told her it meant she belonged to him forever, and if she ever tried to love another man, death would follow. She believed him. Not because she was foolish, but because fear has a way of making lies sound like truth. It took her 8 months to escape. 8 months of panic attacks, sleepless nights, and finally the courage to run. She moved cities, changed her number, started over. But the mark on her wrist remained, faint but visible under certain light, and so did the fear. When Amara met Michael, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could have a normal life. He never pressured her, never asked about her past. He loved her in a way that felt clean, uncomplicated. But as their relationship deepened and marriage became a real possibility, the fear crept back in. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that something terrible would happen if she went through with it. She prayed. She fasted. She went to therapy. But she never told Michael the full truth. How could she? How do you tell the man you love that you're terrified a curse might kill him? So she buried it. She convinced herself that if she just had enough faith, God would protect them. And when Michael proposed on a rooftop under the stars, she said yes through tears, not all of them joyful. The wedding was planned for 6 months later. Everything was perfect. The dress, the venue, the guest list. Pastor Elijah agreed to officiate. He had known Amara since she joined the church a year ago. He had counseled her once, briefly, about her past relationship. She told him she had been in something unhealthy, but she never mentioned the ritual. She never showed him the mark. And so he had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Until the day of the wedding. The morning of the wedding was flawless. The sun poured through stained glass windows, painting the church floor in shades of gold and crimson. The smell of roses and lilies filled the air. Bridesmaids in lavender dresses giggled nervously in the back room. The groomsmen adjusted their ties and joked about Michael finally settling down. Amara sat in front of a mirror, her hands shaking as the makeup artist applied the final touches. Her maid of honor, Jessica, noticed. "Girl, you okay? You're shaking like a leaf." Amara forced a smile. Just nerves. But it wasn't just nerves. That morning she had woken up with the mark on her wrist burning, not painful, but warm, like a warning. She covered it with makeup and a bracelet, but she could still feel it. And as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, every step felt heavier than the last. The guests stood. The music swelled. Michael's face lit up when he saw her, and for a moment she forgot the fear. But then she reached the altar, and Pastor Elijah looked into her eyes. Pastor Elijah had officiated over 100 weddings in his 30 years of ministry. He had seen nervous brides, crying brides, brides who couldn't stop smiling. But when Amara stepped up to the altar, something was different. Her eyes were glassy, distant, like she was looking through him rather than at him. He chalked it up to nerves at first. But then, as he began the opening prayer, he felt it. A coldness, a pressure in the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He opened his eyes and glanced down at Amara's hands, clasped tightly around her bouquet. That's when he saw it. The bracelet on her wrist had shifted, revealing a faint marking, 3 dots inside a loop. His heart stopped. He had seen that symbol before. Years ago, a woman had come to him for deliverance, claiming she had been trapped in a cult that used that exact mark to bind people spiritually. It had taken weeks of prayer and fasting to break her free. And now, here it was again, on the wrist of a bride about to make a lifelong vow. He looked up at Amara's face, and this time he saw it clearly. Fear, not joy, not peace. Fear. And in that moment, he knew, this wedding could not go forward. Pastor Elijah raised his hand. The room fell silent. "Stop," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This wedding cannot continue." The gasps were immediate. Michael's face drained of color. Amara's knees buckled, and her maid of honor barely caught her. The guests erupted in whispers. Some stood, others pulled out their phones. Michael stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Pastor, what are you talking about?" But Pastor Elijah didn't answer him. He looked directly at Amara. "My daughter," he said softly, "I need you to tell the truth. Right now, in front of God and everyone here. What is on your wrist?" Amara's whole body began to tremble. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Pastor Elijah said, "because whatever has you bound, it ends today." And then, as if a dam had broken, Amara collapsed to her knees and sobbed. The church went silent. Even the children stopped crying. And in that holy, terrible silence, she spoke. "I was in something before," Amara said, her voice barely audible. "Before Michael, before I came here. I thought it was a church, but it wasn't. It was a group led by a man who said he was a prophet. He told me God had chosen me for him, that we were spiritually married, and he marked me. She pulled off the bracelet, revealing the symbol on her wrist. The room collectively inhaled. Michael dropped to his knees beside her, his face a mixture of shock and heartbreak. He told me, Amara continued, her voice breaking, that if I ever loved another man, death would follow. And I believed him. I've been so scared, Michael. I've been terrified that marrying you would kill you. Or me. Or both of us. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I just prayed hard enough it would go away. But it didn't. And I'm so sorry. She buried her face in her hands and wept like a child. Michael reached for her, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. Because how do you respond to that? How do you hold someone who has been carrying that kind of terror alone? Pastor Elijah knelt beside them both. Amara, he said gently, what was done to you was not of God. It was manipulation. It was witchcraft disguised as worship. But the blood of Jesus is greater than any mark, any word, any curse spoken over your life. Do you believe that? She nodded, still sobbing. Then let us break it. Right here, right now. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Pastor Elijah called the elders of the church forward. He asked the guests to remain seated and to pray silently. Then he began. He prayed in a way that made the room feel smaller and larger at the same time. He prayed against every lie, every false covenant, every word spoken over Amara's life that was not from God. He called on the name of Jesus, over and over, like a hammer breaking chains. Amara's body shook. She cried out, not in pain, but in release, like something was being pulled out of her that had been lodged deep for years. Michael held her hand the entire time, tears streaming down his own face. Some of the guests began to weep. Others prayed aloud. The atmosphere shifted. The coldness that had filled the room earlier was replaced by something warm, something clean. And then, after what felt like an eternity but was only 15 minutes, Amara went still. She looked up at Pastor Elijah, her eyes clear for the first time that day. "It's gone," she whispered. She looked down at her wrist. The mark was still there, faint as ever, but the weight, the fear, the invisible chains, they were gone. She could feel it. Pastor Elijah stood and addressed the room. "What you have just witnessed," he said, "is the mercy of God. This young woman was bound by fear and lies, but today, in this sanctuary, she has been set free. Now the question remains, do we continue this wedding, or do we wait?" He looked at Michael. Michael looked at Amara, and without hesitation he said, "I want to marry her, today, right now." Amara's eyes widened. "Michael, are you sure? After everything—" "After everything," Michael interrupted, his voice steady. "I love you more, because now I know how strong you are, how much you fought just to be here, and I don't want to wait another second." The guests, still recovering from what they had just witnessed, began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, until the entire church was on its feet. Pastor Elijah smiled. "Then let us begin again, but this time in freedom." The ceremony that followed was unlike any wedding anyone had ever attended. There was no pretense, no performance, just two people standing before God and their community, choosing each other in the rawest, most honest way possible. When Pastor Elijah asked, "Do you, Michael, take Amara to be your wife?" Michael didn't just say, "I do." He said, "I do, and I will spend every day reminding her that she is free, she is loved, and she is mine by choice, not by curse." When he asked Amara, she didn't hesitate. "I do, and I will spend every day believing that I am worthy of this love." They exchanged rings, they kissed, and the church erupted in applause, not polite or obligatory, but full of relief and joy and victory. Because what had almost been a tragedy had become a testimony. In the weeks and months that followed, Amara and Michael's story spread far beyond the walls of Mercy Hill Church, not as gossip, but as hope. People who had been trapped in toxic relationships reached out. Others who carried shame from their pasts found the courage to speak up. Amara started a small support group for women who had experienced spiritual abuse. Michael stood by her side every step of the way. And Pastor Elijah? He continued to do what he had always done, protect the sheep, even when it cost him comfort. Because stopping that wedding wasn't easy. It wasn't popular, but it was right. And sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to look like the villain for a moment so that truth can have its day. So let me ask you this. If you had been in that church that day, what would you have wanted Pastor Elijah to do? Would you have wanted him to stay silent, to let the ceremony continue, to avoid the embarrassment and the mess? Or would you have wanted him to do exactly what he did? Stop everything, risk everything, to protect two people from a future built on fear? And here's the harder question. If you were Amara, would you have had the courage to confess? Or would you have carried that secret into your marriage, hoping it would just go away? Sometimes God interrupts our plans not to punish us, but to protect us. Sometimes He uses other people, people who are brave enough to speak up, to pull us back from the edge. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is not saying yes, but saying stop. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that freedom is always worth fighting for, share it. Because someone in your life needs to hear it. Someone is carrying a secret, a fear, a mark that they think defines them. And they need to know that no curse, no lie, no chain is stronger than the truth. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, your story isn't over, and neither is your freedom.